Good evening. Thank you for joining us for SpaceX and NASA's live coverage of the launch of the 34th Commercial Resupply Services mission to the International Space Station. Falcon 9, as you can see on your screen, is standing ready on the launch pad at Space Launch Complex 40, just minutes away from liftoff at 6:50 p.m. Eastern Time from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station in Florida. Since 2012, Falcon 9 and Dragon have delivered critical supplies and science experiments that help the crew conduct important research in orbit. Today, we're carrying more than 6,000 pounds of cargo, food, equipment, and scientific investigations. I'm Ronnie Foreman, Director of the Rideshare Program here at SpaceX. Thanks for being with us tonight. At just under T-minus 20 minutes, the vehicle is currently on track for an on-time liftoff. Like every Dragon mission headed to the station, we are working with an instantaneous launch window today. If we enter a hold at any time from this point through our liftoff time, we'll scrub for today and come back for our next opportunity on Friday, May 15th at 6:05 p.m. Eastern Time. That instantaneous launch window is because the International Space Station is moving at over 17,000 miles per hour in its orbit right now. To get Dragon to the most efficient path for rendezvous and docking, we need to lift off at exactly the right moment when the station's orbital plane lines up directly over Slick 40. That alignment only happens for a split second. So today we are tracking weather closely with a current 50% chance of violating our launch criteria. As you can see with the clouds behind Falcon 9 on your screen, we do have a weather system in the area that is currently violating the cumulus cloud rule. We'll have more on that in a few minutes. But first, for more on how our station crew is preparing for this delivery today.
Yeah, if we could, that would be great.
A little bit of communication there from Mission Control.
Hello, Ronnie.
Oh, I'll toss it over to Joseph Zakrzewski.
Hello, Ronnie. It's great to be with you again. Sorry about that. It's great to be with you once again, and we're coming to you from the International Space Station, a flight control room here at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. This is the hub where mission operations are managed around the clock to protect the health, safety, and performance of the orbiting laboratory. And it's an especially exciting place to be during a launch like this. Now, as you mentioned, and what we've been monitoring is the weather, and that is what we're looking at ahead of today's launch. It did play a factor in yesterday's launch preparations, and therefore had to be postponed to today and set up for today's attempt. Well, right now, our flight controllers are under the direction of Flight Director Chris Dobbins and the Ignis flight team, and they are closely tracking all systems aboard the International Space Station as we prepare to welcome the delivery of cargo and science. Now, as Ronnie mentioned, Dragon is headed for the International Space Station, and teams here in Houston are working hand in hand with the teams in Hawthorne, California, along with the launch team in Florida to keep the entire operation synchronized. This level of coordination, spanning multiple locations, multiple coasts, and schedules and disciplines, is what enables missions like this to succeed. At this time, I'm happy to share that all systems are performing well, and mission control here in Houston remains go for launch. The station is currently circling more than 250 miles above Earth, and at the time of today's launch, it'll be just south of Newfoundland. And the Expedition 74 crew, including NASA astronauts Jessica Meir, Jack Hathaway, and Chris Williams, are ready for Dragon's arrival. They've already gone through some procedures, prepared the necessary equipment, and are standing by for what will be a busy day on orbit when Dragon begins its docking. This delivery in the Dragon spacecraft includes thousands of pounds of supplies, vital hardware, and scientific investigations that'll keep the crew active and supporting ongoing research. Now, we'll be watching closely here as the countdown continues to progress and the mission gets underway. For now, I'll hand it back to Hawthorne for a closer look at the launch vehicle and the spacecraft supporting the 34th Commercial Resupply Services mission. Back over to you, Ronnie, and Hawthorne.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Joseph. The Falcon 9 rocket supporting today's mission is 2 stages, designed and manufactured by SpaceX for the reliable and safe transport of people and payloads into Earth orbit and beyond. Falcon 9 is also the world's first orbital-class reusable rocket. At the top of Falcon 9 today is our Dragon spacecraft. Dragon has 16 Draco thrusters that can be used in space to help position the spacecraft and navigate it to its final destination, each providing 90 pounds of force. Dragon is the first private spacecraft to take humans to the International Space Station. It's flown 300,000 pounds of cargo and more than 1,000 experiments to space to date. All in, Dragon has been to orbit 55 times, visited the space station 50 times, and has flown 20 human spaceflight missions for 78 crew members representing a total of 20 countries. Of course, just underneath Dragon is our second stage, which is powered by a single Merlin vacuum or MVAC engine on board. With its extended nozzle and optimized design, MVAC drives maximum performance, producing 22,000 pounds of thrust in the vacuum of space. Below the second stage is the black carbon fiber inner stage, and inside of that is where the MVAC engine is located. The largest portion of the rocket is the first stage, which we also call the booster. The first stage supporting today's mission is making its 6th flight to space, having previously launched KF-1, IMAP, NROL-77, GPS-39, and one Starlink mission. Now, about 2.5 minutes into flight, the first stage will separate and make its way back to Earth. Today, the booster is headed back to land at Landing Zone 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. With just about 14.5 minutes to go, all systems on Falcon 9 and Dragon are looking good. As we mentioned earlier, weather continues to be a watch item heading into launch today, and we are still tracking 50% favorable conditions for our T0 liftoff time. Our teams have been monitoring several weather concerns, specifically the cumulus cloud rule and the anvil cloud rule. We're also tracking surface electric fields and the flight through precipitation constraint. These rules all together exist to prevent a rocket from triggering or flying through a lightning strike. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, that storm you can see on your screen is currently violating the cumulus cloud rule. So if we aren't able to launch today, our backup opportunity is Friday, May 15th at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. While that countdown continues, let's hand it back to Joseph in Houston. Joseph?
Thank you very much, Ronnie. And continuing scientific discovery is enabled by missions like today. And as you mentioned, the Dragon is carrying over 6,000 pounds of cargo, including critical scientific hardware and samples. The science aboard Dragon represents months and in some cases years of preparations by dedicated scientists and engineers. And let's take a look at some of the highlights of what's inside Dragon today. Now, some of these research investigations include Odyssey. The Odyssey investigation will evaluate how well Earth-based microgravity simulators recreate space conditions. Researchers will examine bacterial behavior in space and compare the results to experiments conducted in microgravity simulators that are done here on Earth. Another highlight and investigation flying up on Dragon today is STORY. The Story of STORY is an instrument that monitors charged particles in orbit around the Earth. These particles respond to space weather and can impact human assets like power grids and satellites. STORY could help researchers gain knowledge to better predict and respond to these changes. Another investigation is Laplace, and the Laplace study is the movement and collision of dust particles in microgravity to better understand particle motion in space. Other atmospheres, researchers hope to learn more about Earth's origins and provide fundamental understanding of how planets in our solar system and beyond came into existence. Another key investigation flying on Dragon today is GreenBone. Now, GreenBone observes how well bone cells grow and develop on a bone scaffold that is actually made of wood in space. Microgravity results could help researchers improve products that threaten fragile bone conditions such as osteoporosis. And our last research investigation that we'll highlight today is SPARK. SPARK evaluates how red blood cells and the spleen change in space. Researchers will observe human samples and imagery taken before, during, and after spaceflight to identify ways to protect astronaut health during long-duration space missions. Now, these are just some of the incredible research flying to the International Space Station, and you can find out more at nasa.gov/ISS-science. Now, in addition to this incredible research, this mission is carrying several bulk overwrap bags, or bobs as we like to call them, delivering a mix of standard crew-specific and shelf-stable fresh food items to support crew health and morale while they are on orbit for the Expedition 74 crew. These items include standard and crew-requested items. That includes taco kits, chocolate, cereals, along with fresh foods such as apples, tomatoes, and baby carrots. And as we get closer to liftoff, let's check back in with our colleagues in Hawthorne. Ronnie?
Thanks so much, Joseph. So coming up in just about 5 minutes, we're going to watch the support structure next to the vehicle, known as the strongback or the transporter erector, start to pull away from the rocket. The TE, which you have the great view of on your screen right now, is used for a couple different things. We use it to both roll Falcon 9 out to the launch pad and then raise it into its vertical position. It stays connected through the final seconds of the launch countdown. At about 4 minutes and 17 seconds, we'll be looking for the clamp arms around the top of stage 2 to begin opening and pulling away from the vehicle. That's what allows us to pressurize the tanks on board Falcon 9 so that it can stand freely. Then we'll see the transporter erector lean back just a little bit in preparation for liftoff. There you can see those clamp arms just above the American flag on your screen right there, and the transporter erector is now on the right-hand side of Falcon 9. As we mentioned earlier, today's mission does have an instantaneous launch window, and we have 1 exact second when Falcon 9 must lift off to properly target the space station. That's different from many satellite missions, where the launch window can last several minutes or even hours, as the spacecraft can adjust its orbit after launch. The International Space Station travels around Earth at more than 17,000 miles per hour, completing an orbit roughly every 90 minutes. And today we are launching Dragon at a precise time to be able to catch it. And a helpful way to think about this is throwing a dart at another dart that's already moving. Falcon 9 has to place Dragon into the orbital plane at an exact time so that Dragon naturally lines up with the station over the next several orbits. With that in mind, we'll keep an eye on the countdown as we approach 9 minutes to go. But with that, let's check back in with Joseph in Houston. Joseph?
Thank you very much, Ronnie. And yes, we continue to monitor both the weather and the countdown as we're about to hit exactly 9 minutes to go until liftoff of NASA's SpaceX 34th Commercial Resupply Services mission. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Expedition 74 crew on board the International Space Station currently is ready to receive Dragon, and they have already gone through procedures and preparations ahead of what would be a docking time early tomorrow morning, and then it will be about a 12-hour phasing period for this cargo mission to arrive to the orbiting laboratory. So let's go ahead and take a look at who is on board for the station and who will be receiving this critical scientific hardware and cargo. Well, for Expedition 74, that features NASA astronauts Chris Williams, Jessica Meir, and Jack Hathaway. For Chris Williams, he would arrive on station last Thanksgiving, November 27, 2025, as a part of Soyuz MS-28 with the current station commander, Sergei Kutsverchkov and Sergei Mikheyev. For Jessica Meir and Jack Hathaway, they would arrive on station back on February 13th of this year on Dragon Freedom. And they were joined by ESA astronaut, or European Space Agency astronaut, Sophie Adno, and Roscosmos cosmonaut, Andrei Fedyaev. Now, together, all 7 of them will be excited and anxiously awaiting the arrival of the Dragon spacecraft, which, as I mentioned, is scheduled for docking pending liftoff today, docking for early tomorrow morning at 7:35 a.m. Eastern Time. And, of course, we'll have all the coverage for you as Dragon makes its approach to the orbiting laboratory. And on tap to monitor Dragon as it makes its approach to the International Space Station will be NASA astronaut Jack Hathaway and ESA astronaut Sophie Adno. So they'll be on track monitoring from the cupola, the window to the world aboard the International Space Station as Dragon makes its approach and eventual docking to deliver over 6,500 pounds of total cargo, and the pressurized with packaging about 4,701 pounds, and some unpressurized payloads in the trunk of Dragon at 1,799 pounds. Now, we highlighted some of the crew food options that are going on board, and some of the science investigations. For science, 1,834 pounds are making its way to the International Space Station. Crew supplies, a little more than 1,300 pounds. Also, spacewalk equipment, vehicle hardware, and computer resources are all a part of this critical mission to the orbiting laboratory. Now, as we get closer and closer to T-0, we're 6 minutes and 40 seconds and counting. I'll make my way back over to Hawthorne and Ronnie as we walk through the next critical milestones and fueling of this Falcon 9 rocket with Dragon on top.
Thanks so much, Joseph.
Stage 1 RP1 load is complete.
There's confirmation from Mission Control that we have finished loading RP1 on board Falcon 9. RP1 stands for Rocket Propellant 1, which is a highly refined type of kerosene. Once we're fully loaded, just before liftoff, Falcon 9 will have about 1 million pounds of fuel on board, including that RP-1 and liquid oxygen, which you'll hear called out over the nets as LOX. We are still just about 1.5 minutes away from keeping an eye open for those clamp arms to open up around stage 2. That's one of the next major visual milestones that we'll see as we follow along in the countdown. Those clamp arms are significant because they help to stabilize the rocket during fueling. They also prevent movement in high winds. So once they're open, the rocket is fully free at the top. We're also going to be listening for that confirmation from Mission Control that Falcon 9 has been pressurized. That's what enables it to stand freely and to let those clamp arms open up. We are, of course, continuing to monitor the weather around Space Launch Complex 40. We are still tracking the cumulus cloud rule right now, but we are expecting it to clear as we get closer to
Falcon 9 tanks are pressing for the start of strongback retract.
To our T0 time. And there we heard confirmation
Dragon is in terminal count and is on internal power.
A couple good call-outs from Mission Control there. We are both pressurizing for strongback retract, which we were just talking about, and Dragon is on board internal power. We'll also hear the call-out that Falcon 9 is on its internal power at about T-minus 60 seconds. At that point, the vehicle will have fully taken over the countdown.
Lower has started.
And there's confirmation the strongback is beginning to retract. We might get a shot of those clamp arms opening up around the rocket here in just a second. All told, that maneuver, there we go, takes about 15 seconds for them to fully open. And then at this point, the strongback is able to recline just about 2 degrees away from Falcon 9 to give it room for liftoff. And again, now that those clamp arms are fully open, the vehicle is standing fully free at the top. The launch tower strongback will begin moving away from Falcon 9 so that it can stand freely before liftoff. It'll actually throw back to a full 45 degrees away from Falcon 9 right at that T0 time to give the rocket a little bit of extra room. Joseph, how's the range looking?
Thank you, Ronnie, and that's great you asked. The launch range is green and ready to support today's launch. And you see some great views there as we're now inside 3.5 minutes away from launch. But again, continuing to monitor the weather, and if for some reason we do not launch today, we have that backup opportunity we've been talking about, which will be on Friday, May 15th at 6:05 p.m. Eastern Time. Now, coming up here in just about 10 seconds or so, we're going to hear about the Stage 1 liquid oxygen loading complete, and that'll mean that everything is starting to fill up and get ready to go ahead of today's launch.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
And perfect timing there, as you heard over the countdown net, as confirmation of that Stage 1 liquid oxygen loading has been completed, and the second stage will finish up about a minute later from now. And these tanks are also pressurized with helium, and that helium is chilled also, so it stays compatible with the cryogenic plumbing during flight, and that pressurization helps force propellant into the engines as the tanks empty. And now in these last few moments, Falcon 9 is performing final health checks on its primary communications and avionics. And now we enter with 2.5 minutes to go. The TVCA checkouts, or the thrust vector control actuators, are underway. And this is referred to as the engine gimbal or wiggle test. And this is when SpaceX will move the nozzles ever so slightly to make sure that the guidance hardware is acceptable for flight. SpaceX does the same checkouts on the first stage engines, and that happens just seconds before ignition. Now,
Stage 2 LOX load is
2 minutes before liftoff. And that was exactly what I was about to say. We were ready for that Stage 2 liquid oxygen load complete. And at the time of liftoff, again, some 260 miles above Earth, the International Space Station orbiting and ready to receive cargo. And they are currently going to be off the coast of Newfoundland. Now, in about 15 seconds, we'll hear the auto idle and the gas closeouts. And those gas closeouts refer to the venting and closing out of gaseous systems, like topping off the tanks and sealing all the vents to maintain pressure. And you've also may have noticed that the white clouds that are billowing around the rocket right now, that is the liquid oxygen as it warms slightly inside the tanks. Some of it boils off, and that gas is vented to manage pressure. And when the vented oxygen hits the warm air, it instantly condenses into clouds. Similar principle as your breath on a cold morning, just on a much bigger scale.
Falcon 9 has entered startup.
There is that confirmation we were waiting for, that Falcon 9
is in countdown.
and Dragon are in startup mode. At this point, our onboard flight computers have taken over the countdown. Just inside of T-minus 2 seconds, the 9 Merlin 1D engines on the Falcon 9 first stage will ignite. Once they're at full power, Falcon 9 will lift off the pad and begin its climb to orbit. We are listening in for the final go from...
Hold. We are no-go due to violations of launch weather rules.
The launch auto sequence has been aborted.
Unfortunately, just as we were listening for our launch director to call go for launch, instead we heard a hold called out over the nets due to weather. We were tracking some weather concerns at the start of our countdown today. So now let's listen in for any additional information about the hold from our team. If you've been following it along today, you know that we are supporting NASA's commercial resupply services mission to the International Space Station, and that we had a hold called at about T-minus 28 seconds for weather. Weather can be tricky to work around, and sometimes the forecast just isn't in our favor. But hopefully the weather clears up in time for our next launch opportunity, which is Friday, May 15th at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. Be sure to check out our website and X account for further updates. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you soon.